In sports, the scoreboard doesn't tell the full story, but Netflix does. Stories about dads who happen to be world-class quarterbacks and a battle for the heart, soul, and direction of the multi-billion-dollar business of F1. Whether you're a diehard fan or you're brand new, Netflix has the stories for every type of fan. You can watch these incredible sports stories like Quarterback, F1 Drive to Survive, Untold, and many more now on Netflix.
This episode is brought to you by Columbia Sportswear. It's snowing again, and that wind chill is killer. But you're not worried about that because you shop the Omni Heat Infinity Collection. It's warmth perfected with tiny gold dots that reflect your body heat inside and protect you from the cold outside. No snow or chilly temps can stop you now. Go out anyway. Shop the Omni Heat Infinity Collection now at Columbia.com/infinity.
Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back up front when you use it to buy a new iPhone 15, AirPods, or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, member FDIC. Terms apply.
Serie A Chronicles is a Serie A Chronicles production.
Hello and welcome back to Serie A Chronicles. Did you miss us? It's been a whole week, but it was our first week, so I'm sure that felt extra long not hearing from us. I'm Nicky Bandini and I am back with Mina to talk you through all of the action from Serie A. It has been another dramatic weekend in Serie A. Mina, how did you enjoy it?
It's really hard to enjoy it when my team is in 18th position. I'm starting. I still have hope and a lot of it, but I'm wondering whether I should probably bin that level of hope now. It's also difficult because I think there are just it's really bizarre to have a Serie A league that is so good, but sometimes at times it's almost like I can't watch every match, but I really, really want to. So it's almost giving me a level of anxiety that I didn't expect because just the tactics on show. How is this not the league that everyone wants to watch is beyond me.
Honestly, it's been a really fun, lively start to new season. There's so much going on. We're going to get into all of this, but obviously we've just had a European round. Italian teams as a collective didn't do great, honestly, in this opening round. There were some bright spots, there were some less bright spots. But I
they did badly.
Well, they didn't, and we'll get into it. And I think different teams, different expectations, different performances, and the performances and results didn't always sit together. I think this start to this season has set things up in a way that has me really, really gripped. And I suppose to sort of name it, rather than your allusion just now to the fact that your team is off to a bad start, the headline story this week is Juventus drew with Milan. They went 1-0 up. They started quite well, but then ended up drawing 1-1. Juventus now have 2 points from their opening 4 games. It's their joint worst start ever. They've had 3 other seasons in their Serie A history where they've gone 4 games without winning. So that's, I suppose, the big setup to everything else that's fascinating right now is Juventus aren't Juventus, Mina.
Yeah, and everything that you read is, this hasn't happened to Juventus since 1961. Here's the thing, yeah, like I got actually very irritated because I only read some of the newspapers today and I couldn't read all of them because we're recording and I slept really late, woke up really late. It's a whole thing that I have. By the way, people should know I'm a vampire, so I don't sleep before 4 a.m. I'm usually like, doing stuff or reading stuff or doing American TV or whatever it is. And woke up at like 11, started reading Gazzetta, and then just got so angry at the way that this game was defined and explained. Here's the thing, Juventus were amazing in the first half, and that wasn't noted. And I feel like a lot of the things that were being noted was the fact that Milan came back to it. Yeah, I'm really happy. And it's true, Milan's game and their tactics and what they've built onto Pioli, in the sense that they can still hold their tactical formation, that they can always grow back into the game, is a wonderful thing. I mean, we saw that against Liverpool in midweek, in the Champions League. We saw what a horrible start they had. We saw how they just stick to what is familiar to them. They always work and are disciplined positionally so that they can once again try to steal what they can. And they did do that. They shocked Liverpool. But I still think that people are like, okay, Juventus, they're just a bunch of runners. We discussed that against Pirlo. We discussed the fact that there was a lack of balance in between ball players and runners. What seems to me like what the team that they have is a side that's very good at sort of just running forward and trying to hope for a pass, but that there weren't enough people there that offer those passes. And it makes a difference when you don't have a director in midfield. We are missing Arthur. And obviously Dybala did a splendid role in actually being in the team and trying to be the one that creates something. But, the amount of hypocrisy about how this is a side that is just, counter-attacking. But Antonio Conte was revered and beloved because of his simple, long ball Bastoni, Lukaku holds it up, and all of a sudden Conte is a freaking genius. But when Allegri does it, it's, this is so bad. We expect so much more from Juventus. The lack of construction, the fact that they just all run and nothing more. That, I'm still getting over it, and I feel my anger. So it's the microphone's with you, Nicky.
I love Mina. I love that Conte is gone, but Conte will never be gone from our conversations.
Never.
I look, and I'm a big Allegri sort of, I don't know if fan's the right word, but I've been very enthusiastic about his work for years. And I think I was an Allegri early adopter, which some people really weren't. I remember the hostility when he first came to Juventus first time around, and they were extra at him. I was already on board from his Milan time. I think even his end at Milan, when you look at it with hindsight and where Milan's trajectory was going, I think he held things together while the Milan project was being picked apart surprisingly well. But Allegri has never promise anyone some idealistic, beautiful football. And someone was talking to me about this. Someone raised this with me on Twitter last night, saying that they felt like even when things were going well in the first half, they didn't see a big idea. And to me, Allegri has never been a big ideas guy. I mean, that's kind of his whole shtick, is he's a pragmatic guy. And I think that his big idea for that Milan game ultimately came down to something which, it's not exciting. Like I'm never going to tell you it's the most exciting brand of football you get from Allegri, but something we've seen before from him, which is a low block. They had a very deep back four, and they're relying on Chiellini and Bonucci as always in that low block, creating space further forward for, in the end, it was Dybala in particular in that first half, but your stars to do things. And Allegri has returned to this concept a few times. He's drawn the parallels with basketball before, where he's talked about who do you want taking your shot for you at the end of the game. And I think they did draw Milan on. We saw it on the first goal. Obviously, Milan got that little bit too high up the pitch and off went Morata to the races. But even after that, I really loved in the first half how Dybala was finding spaces. It wasn't just about Dybala being this sort of player who can be brilliant in the final third of the pitch. It's actually the creation that he does. Because I think when you had that axis going of Bonucci, and we've always known that Bonucci can play great passes from the back, but Dybala also dropping into the middle of the pitch and playing these sort of long arcing passes out to the outside. I think that that is Allegri in the end. It's pragmatism, and then an alliance of that pragmatism with, here are my best players, and I'm going to put them in position to do what they do well. I think the thing that's really bothering me with this iteration of Juventus so far, and it's only 4 games, and I'm really sort of resistant to any of the grand narratives, because as we said, I think on last week's podcast, all right, they did win their 4th game in 2015, but Juventus started horribly in 2015 and won the league. I think they won their 4th game, then lost the 5th one again, so it wasn't much different. But what is bothering me, if anything, is I think there has been now, on more than one occasion, because it happened against Udinese as well, this complacency in the lead, that because in the past Allegri's teams were able to take a lead and go, right, done, that they're trying to do that again. And I don't know if Juventus can do it anymore. this isn't the Juventus with Buffon at the back. It isn't the Juventus. It's still Chiellini and Bonucci, and even that was a conversation point because Allegri doesn't want anyone saying to him, "Hey, why isn't De Ligt playing these important games?" But it's not the same Bonucci and Chiellini, and especially with Szczesny. Not that Szczesny was particularly at fault in this game as he has been in previous games, but the story of their start of the season includes Szczesny having a lack of confidence. I just am not sure that this way of doing it is going to work. And so if Allegri is the manager that I think he is, he needs to start being more proactive in working out different solutions to how do we manage a game? How do we see out a game rather than just getting ourselves into a good position?
No, I take your point on what you're saying about the fact that this isn't a team that can defend. And what we know so well from Allegri is that he is all about defense. Defense wins you championships, right? That's what Juventus did for 9 years until before that, until Sarri came along and they didn't win it with the best defense. And then it became a problem. So, but that's... Look, I think that comes from the fact that once upon a time, this was a midfield that held Arturo Vidal, that had Marchisio, Andrea Pirlo, and had a lot of possession on the ball. And then afterwards, Pjanic, even though I wasn't his biggest fan, but whatever it is, you still always had players that were capable of Sami Khedira in Matuidi. Matuidi worked really hard. Sami Khedira was the most tactically intelligent midfielder in the world. What you have right now is a midfield that struggles to maintain possession and struggles to fill in the gaps when they do appear, and they are going to appear. There's no such thing as the greatest partnership in in defense. When people talk to me about defenders, the only one true quality or character that I really love is a player who can do something one-on-one, which is why it will always be like the likes of Sergio Ramos and Romero for me. I love who they are. But in order to create a great defensive unit, it is about your midfield knowing when to pick up the gaps. And sadly, he just doesn't have that midfield right now. This is where I have an issue with the fact that it is very unbalanced. And in what we do have is just a bunch of runners, not enough possession players, no ability to, let's say, hold the ball, but also not enough tactical intelligence. It's about lots of individual mistakes. But I sort of don't want to go into that, because I also think that there's a lot of expectation from a Juventus side that we know has been badly built, that for a few seasons under Paratici after Beppe Marotta left. We know that there are a lack of balances there. So the fact that everyone's looking to Allegri to resolve all of this and to all of a sudden have this beautiful idea of creating football, I think he's done masterfully well with what he has. Yes, it's a great team on paper, but that never mattered, because we look at PSG every year. They've always had the greatest team on paper and they didn't win Europe. That's not what matters. What matters is right now trying to get the players to understand what the role is. Okay, I only have runners, so how can I have a team that just runs and manages to win? Let's overwhelm them. Let's always depend on Morata when it comes to the counterattack. If there was ever a counterattacking game, I will always choose Morata, because he's the only one that can run and guarantee you that goal. And so, Dybala actually creating and producing, and not just being the guy who's trying to collect the ball from Szczesny, And I think that says something. So there are little things that are growing that make me or give me hope. But the fact that Gazzetta dello Sport or Sky Italia can sit there and say to me, yeah, well, where's the construction? Who is it that you would like to construct the game exactly? Are you looking at the sheets? Are you looking at what the players are available rather than the price tag? And the fact is that we're 4 matches in and you can't believe that they're not dominating possession. These are the things that bother me.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me at all whether they dominate possession, because Conte won the league not dominating possession, as you say. But I don't know that I share your optimism in totality about where this will go. I think it will get better. And look, Federico Chiesa wasn't on the pitch for a lot of this match, and as soon as you put him in there, I think it's a very different threat they carry. I am beginning to worry more week by week about the thing that I sort of started off season not worrying about, which is, are we going to see someone step up and replace those goals that Ronaldo was scoring? But again, when Chiesa isn't on the pitch for 90 minutes, then that takes away probably the player who I expect most to do that for Juventus. I don't know. I mean, obviously, just to throw to their Champions League game again, which has happened since we last spoke, not much to say about it, I don't think, in that case, because it was a win over Malmo, but at least it was a win. I don't know, Mina. I week by week, I become a little bit less convinced of Allegri's ability to make this Juventus into what I thought it was to start the season, which is a title winner. That is what I thought at the start of the season. Maybe I was naive, but I thought it's Max Allegri and it's Juventus, it's a title winner. And I don't know, do you feel like this team can win a title? Because I'm again, week to week more skeptical.
Here's the thing. I think that's a great question because we were having a mini discussion, but can you see anyone winning the title? Oh, I'm sure you'll tell us actually a bit later. But
it's
for me,
it's a great point.
Yeah. But for me, here is what it is. Like, if you're expecting Allegri to astound you or to make things a lot of fun to watch, then they're not. What he can do is make them cynical. And I do believe in his ability to shore up the defense. I think if they become a team that can shore up the defense and then they can release sort of Morata and perhaps bring on Chiesa, and Kulusevski will adapt more. Again, people are expecting a lot of Kulusevski. Like, let's just calm down. The guy played, for 1 year and 4 games in. So let's not, expect the world. But he does have something special. There is a lot of special players. But I think what we also see is that this is a team that needs market interference in January. And there needs to be a player in midfield that can actually hold the ball. Because Arthur, I don't think, is somebody you could depend on from a physical point of view. But rather than be down on all of this, I do also want to point out that I thought Milan were marvelous. Not obviously not because, usually I can say, oh, it's Kessier and it's all of this, but it's Brahim Diaz is rather amazing to watch at the moment. Their midfield works to perfection. And this is a team that was missing Calabria. Like, if anyone knows, Calabria is like my favorite player basically in the world. Yeah. And I do think he's the best fullback, but they're missing him. They're reliant on Teo Hernandez. There's no Zlatan. There's no Giroud. There's a Kessie that's under par. And you just, it's like this overwhelming team. They've just played Liverpool. So you can understand that on a mental level, they might be exhausted. And yet they've slowly constructed the game. Now, do you think it is the beauty of their tactics and what Pioli's done, or that Juve tired on a psychological level?
I wasn't just worried about, you just mentioned mental fatigue. I thought they would be physically fatigued because honestly, so I am, that game against Liverpool, which I covered for Stan Sports in Australia. If we've got any Aussie listeners, we are produced out of Australia. I thought it was a fascinating game. And this is one where I do want to talk a bit more about that Champions League game, just because it's so long, even though it's so long since it's happened, I just think we haven't had a chance to talk about that on this show. I thought it was such a fascinating game because Liverpool were on a different level to Milan at the beginning. But the things that really encouraged you about Milan were the mental resilience of a young team. Still, I think 6 out of Milan's team that night were playing their first ever Champions League game. And a bunch of the others were talking about 3 or 4 Champions League games before that. And you're away at Anfield after a year and a half of empty stadiums. You're in sort of one of the noisiest, most sort of, hostile is not the right word for Anfield, but certainly one of the sort of hardest places to win in all of Europe.
And packed, not like Italian stadiums that are 50%. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And packed. And I thought the resilience was astonishing. And I thought we saw what was good about this Milan team, which is, well, some of what's good about it, which is that directness of the running from Brahim Diaz, Rafael Leao, Rebic, like what they can do when they are doing Pioli's vision, which is much more sort of clear at this point, Pioli's vision for this Milan, and then of course Allegri just back at Juventus. Against Juventus, I did think at the beginning a bit tired.
But they both played in Europe, so...
Yeah, no, I think both teams had a little bit of fatigue going on, but I would say that Milan's game was a lot more intense in midweek than Juventus was. Okay. But what impressed me most about Milan against Juventus was simply the resilience. I thought myself 1-0 down against the Max Allegri team. This is done. Like, I really did. Like, I spent a lot of that sort of
did you?
End of the first half, beginning of the second half thinking, they're not going to find a way back because it's Max Allegri. I've been conditioned, Mina. Have you not been conditioned? It's Max Allegri. It's the Allianz Stadium. It's Juventus. They're going to hold on.
No, it's 18 games where they've conceded goals. I don't believe in that defense at all. I mean, you can honestly put Sergio Ramos, David Alaba, whoever you want to say in the world, Chiellini and Bonucci and Van Dijk, and I still think they'll concede. I don't believe in this team at all when it comes to the bag. But yeah, so you feel like you were conditioned.
It's a great point to raise because actually when we talk about the last time Juventus started poorly in 2015, or at least this poorly, and they went on to win under Allegri, they did it with, I can't remember how many games it was from Buffon without conceding a goal, but it was an extraordinary number of games of consecutive clean sheets, and that feels a long way off.
Chesney, to his credit, did a little bit better and managed at least one great save in this game. But I also think from a defensive point of view, it's a midfield that's quite inexperienced. You mentioned, like I was just reading the stats now, Liverpool, 377 starts in the Champions League over what? Like Milan had less than 50 of their players who had managed appearances in the Champions League. So that was a great point. But for Juve, when you look at that midfield of Rabiot, Bentancur and Locatelli, they're like kids, they're kids that don't really have the veteran experience. They've focused a lot on, and obviously Milan have kids too, but better kids. So I think these things make a difference.
I think one of the fascinating things, Mina, is talking about Milan's midfield as a contrast to Juventus' midfield, which, as we've talked about, it feels like a weakness of that team. I think a couple of years ago, not even last season maybe, but the season before, you and I did talk about this midfield of Bennacer and Kessie is like maybe the best tandem in all of Serie A, despite their youth at that time. And Bennacer's obviously had a really tough season. Last season was injured a lot, wasn't quite at that level. I don't think he is back to that level yet. But in the meantime, and when I say the meantime, I mean literally just the first 4 games of this season, Sandro Tonali has taken this huge step forward, which is incredibly exciting for those of us who follow Italian football. He's someone who came with such high expectations from Brescia, unfortunately slapped with the next Andrea Pirlo sticker way too soon just because he was playing at Brescia and he had floppy hair. But I actually really, really think he might be, and again, I'm not saying he's a better footballer, something than Kessie, but in the first few games of the season might even have been a more consistent performer than Kessie. He's been so forward-thinking with his passes. He's offering that directness with the ball that I think is really working with, again, the way Pioli's team wants to play, the way that those runners want to come from the tre quarti, from Benas, from Leao, from Diaz, from if he's playing as a false 9, Rebic in front of them as well, and Silemakers. And against Liverpool, it was a real shame that we didn't get to see him because he was going to start and then he got sick.
Here's the thing, I think that he's benefiting from having, weirdly enough, I think Milan are benefiting from not having Çalhanoğlu. And I think that Sandro Tonali is benefiting from the fact that this is the Milan side that is better than last year, that can attack across all fronts. They have obviously contributed to that, but there's a lot more sturdiness in the sense that it was quite leaning on Theo Hernandez usually, and it was again against Juve because they weren't strong on the other side, but there's a lot more unpredictability there. Tonali has also worked personally hard on trying to improve himself. He wants to make the difference, which is why I say sometimes with Kulusevski, give him time. Sometimes you just need a player to understand his role, and it's not thriving in chaos, but thriving within the tactics and the setup that has been implemented by your coach. That is the one department that they need is Zlatan or Cagliari. That is the one department that for me, they could really do with a wise old head. Kessie, Bennacer, Tonali, they all possess a range of talent and they're all a little bit different. One's always a little bit better at this, one's a bit of that. I don't see that in Juventus. There isn't diversity there. And that's what I love about this Milan is that it's not just purely his tactics, but it's great scouting. They keep looking for different things, Okay, we need speed, but we also need possession, but we need this. And they have managed to create a side that substitutions will make the difference, that they can easily take one player out, put another one in, and it's still an amazing team.
Really, really impressive resilience again from Milan. They are still unbeaten. This was their first drop points.
Just before we stop, can I say something? Pioli still hasn't defeated Allegri. That's something he needs to do.
That's true. That is true. But we should take a tiny pause and then let's get on to talking about some of the other games that happened this week.
So midweek, we saw an exquisite performance. Well, exquisite might be just a tad too much, but Inter were really, really good against Real Madrid. They created so many opportunities, but they didn't convert them and ended up losing to Real Madrid, who have all the experience in the world when it comes to the Champions League. And it sort of continues the thread of what's going on with Inter and Europe. A completely opposite thread to Juventus, who can't win in the league, but managed it in the Champions League against Malmö. Now, Inter then have to face Bologna. And it isn't just an easy game. It's a 6-1 win. And one thing they should be upset is that they did concede the one. But this looks to be a side that was like, you know what, we're so annoyed that we didn't get to take all our chances against Real Madrid. So you know what? We're going to look at this Bologna side. We're going to look at the fact that they are just so hideous at the back. Hideous is, you know, in every... I don't even know how to emphasize this word enough, but let's get the 6 goals. Let's show you what we can do. The highest center of gravity on an offensive level, they were simply spectacular. But again, I don't want to judge this too much because I don't know whether this is about the fact that you're champions of Italy facing the worst Bologna that I've seen, or has to be the worst performance, or whether I can really be able to say with conviction that this is a strong Inter side. I still don't know. What do you think, Nicky?
Yeah, I'm going to hold judgment a while longer because it's 4 games. I'm trying to hold judgment about all of these teams, if I'm being honest, because I feel myself week to week pulling and getting overexcited because I'm clearly very excited about the new season, as we've talked about, Mina. But I do think what's interesting is, you alluded to it, the thing that was so encouraging for me was the Inter performance against Madrid, which I thought was, as you say, really impressive, really commanding, with a caveat, which is that actually I think, and you could possibly throw this same criticism at the Sampdoria game, which they drew before facing Madrid. I think Inzaghi got his changes wrong, and I think Ancelotti got his changes just right for Real Madrid, and that's why the game slipped away from them, because I think Inter set up perfectly and dominated Real Madrid, and then as the changes were made, they lost a little bit of that momentum, and Madrid made a couple of changes that won the game. It was Camavinga coming on and Rodrigo coming on, and those two combined and won the game. The Bologna game is interesting for 100 levels. I mean, there's so many threads that I don't think we can get to them all in one go. I think it's, first of all, speaks to the mentality of this team. And it was interesting at the halftime interview with Milan Skriniar. He says, basically, like, I use the word rabbia, which means rage. Like, I was furious, basically, that we didn't beat Madrid, and we all came here with this mindset of taking it out on someone, and they did. They took it out on Bologna. You're totally correct. The defending was atrocious, but I mean, so just to sort of quickly say what happened: 6-1, 3 goals in each half. The first half, it's all Denzel Dumfries dominating down the right, sending all these crosses in. It's from one of his crosses that Lautaro scores the opener. It's another one that deflects to Barella for the 3rd goal. Meanwhile, Di Marco sets up Skriniar for a header from a corner. Second half, it all seems to be going down the other side, Di Marco's side. And you get a goal from Vecino, you get 2 goals from Dzeko. And then, as Mina said, just a consolation at the end. I think the thing that jumps out to me, honestly, about this game as something that is meaningful rather than just, interesting early season stuff that's happening is, right away, we're looking for ways that Inzaghi can define himself as different to Conte, because he's being quite sort of a continuity manager in lots of ways. And I think that one of the ways in which he's immediately defining himself as different is he's using the squad. He's doing the thing that we criticize Conte for not doing a lot, where we'd say Conte gets too stuck in his head of certain players, even ignoring certain players he's insisted gets brought in. Inzaghi has thrown Dumfries straight in there. He has now played Di Marco in 2 different positions in a couple of games in Serie A. Got some good things and some bad things out of him, but definitely some good out of him. I mean, the set pieces from Di Marco are already brilliant. He made a conscious decision to rest Çalhanoğlu, to rest Perisic, and to rest Dzeko. Unfortunately, Dzeko ended up having to come on because Carrillo got injured. I think he's being much more deliberate about his use of his squad than Conte was. Conte used, I think there were 9 players who started at least 29 games in Serie A last season. I'm not even here to say, oh, this is brilliant. I'm here to say this is interesting. And it's one of the things that I'm interested to see how it plays out going forward. Not least because the next 8 days for Inter are really tough. They go away to Fiorentina, home to Atalanta, and then away to Shakhtar. That's already a huge week in their season in the space of 8 days.
Well, at least they know they can win against Shakhtar. It's De Zerbi. But that was so mean.
Going away to Kharkiv, Mina, you're just being mean because it's De Zerbi.
Yes, I am. Anyway, and all of Dionisi's problems right now are so the hangover from De Zerbi's defensive tactics. Anyway, yeah, I agree with a lot of actually what you're saying in the sense that he is using his squad. I didn't actually think about this until you've talked about it now. You're right. He did rest a few of these players. I wonder whether For me, I didn't understand, as in if I had Denzel Dumfries, I'm a big fan of this guy. I was a big fan of him watching him for PSV. He was always somebody that in my head I was like, because there's not enough fullbacks that I really rate, especially maybe in Italy, And I always tend to, it's something that I'm just like so jealous of England because they have like 100 great fullbacks, And so he's always been one that I've looked at because I think that, you see, I had issues with Achraf Hakimi. I do think he's amazing, and I will always think he's amazing. That's not what it is. It's just that sometimes on the defensive level, I wasn't always confident of him. And I feel the same way about Teo Hernandez. There's something about both of them that I'm not that on board with. I prefer my fullbacks to be a little Carvajal. Dumfries is actually, like he is very fast. He is a lot more in the Achraf Hakimi mode and style than Carvajal, for example, who I really like, or Calabria, But he's wickedly good. And yet I cannot really feel confident in saying this about the team because tactically, Bologna went out there to be slaughtered. And they had played this very offensive setup. And here's the thing that, question, like for me, in all honesty, if I was in charge of Bologna, and because I do have that ability to be a little bit crazy and volcanic as a president, I would have sacked Mihailovic after this match. I'm telling you right now, I would have certainly sacked them. Like, I understand that you had a really great defensive performance against one of the worst Verona sides that we've seen in a really long time. And you spoke about it in your post-match conference about how happy you were that you had managed to draw on sacrifice and really managed to battle it out. Again, it was Hellas Verona who were in terrible sorts and not yet understanding the tactics being deployed by Di Francesco. But for you to then think that gave you the right to go against the champions of Italy and play in such a manner in which you have an attacking midfielder in this sort of narrow formation in hopes that you would be able to score a bunch of goals against a Brian Skriniar. Like it seems to me that you went out there to be slaughtered on a tactical level and you got your just desserts. So I find it hard because in many ways this was such an easy match, for Inter, especially having come off the back of it with Real Madrid. This was like, it must be a gift from God, We faced a really tough team. We couldn't score a goal. So you know what? Here it is. Let's just have fun with this one. Let's score 1,000 goals. But I want to look at the fact that Lautaro Martinez, for me, because I've had issues with him. I haven't always been impressed with him in every way, but now he is turning into a complete forward. And that is the thing that I really, really like about him. He's not just a guy that sort of, hangs around next to Lukaku looking to see what can be spread out to him and what he can take advantage of. He is involved in play. He can score goals. He is looking around. He plays with his head up. As he is really taking instructions on board and managing to make the difference in the final third. And I think his development under Inzaghi has been, you can see it. And it's only been a few matches, but you can already see that he's taken that mantelpiece. He understands Lukaku is gone and is like, I'm going to make the difference. Di Marco, again, coming in from Verona, being able to just, you're right, there's been mistakes. He's young, it's new. But again, amazing acclimatization to this new team, to a team that demands a lot. From a mentality level, I don't know about the side. I still feel that because I still keep going back to Sampdoria. And I think you should have been better in really not conceding those 2 goals. So I don't know whether it's just that Bologna was so easy for them and they were so angry that this was an easy match and like the gods had aligned for them. When it comes to substitutions, we talked about it, Brugge and Lazio. I think, if anything, the weakest point in this team is Simone Inzaghi. I think that he's made them so sophisticated going forward on an offensive level. And I can see you're really shocked. They play so high up. There's so much unpredictability. Tactically, I think he's a wizard. Tactically, I think he's better than so many Serie A coaches. But in the moments that make a difference, when you know which player to take on, which player to take off, the psychology of the team, reading the actual moments within a game, he doesn't impress me at all.
I think he's walked it. I think it's not an easy job what Inzaghi's taken on. I know it's easy to go, look, they just won the league and it's easy, right? I think, first of all, so many managers struggle with that. The last Inter manager to follow a title-winning Inter manager, of course, Rafa Benitez, who came in after Mourinho won the league, struggled pretty hard with it. And I think what is interesting with Inzaghi as a choice is he's clearly the continuity candidate, right? He plays with a back 3 like Conte did. He relies heavily, or at least did at Lazio, on partenza, the sort of quick strike attack, the exploiting those spaces behind an opponent. I'm avoiding the word counter-attacking, Mina. Do you know why? Because Conte was always, we're not a counter-attacking team, so I'm avoiding it. I'm talking about the words that Conte would use for his form of football. There's a lot of shared ideology in the way that they play. So it's a straightforward transition in that sense, right? You go from a manager who wants to play a certain way to a manager who wants, sure, different nuances, but to play in a broadly similar way. But I still think that you get credit for starting the season as well as this, because I think it's not easy actually to come in, especially when, as we all, and I don't think anyone can say they didn't do this, before this season was saying, there's no Lukaku, there's no Hakimi, it can't be as good. And it might not be as good, by the way. It's still very early. But I agree with you that substitutions are his weakest point. I think that's allowable, given that he has only got 5 years at Lazio as his professional management experience. Now, that's a pretty good place to be getting a professional management experience, but he's not got the breadth that some others do. But I think he has to get better at it. I think that's something we have to see growth this season, and Inter need him to show growth in for sure. I just think it's really interesting. Actually, it's funny to bring it back to Mihajlovic quickly. I think if you're watching Serie A and you're not trying to take in, this is a broader sort of message actually for all of our listeners, and I hope that maybe some listeners who are newer to Serie A might take this on. If you're watching Serie A and you're not at least trying to take in some of what's happening around the games themselves, you're not getting the full experience, right? Because the press conferences, I swear to goodness, in Serie A are part of the show. And Mihajlovic, before this game, actually got a couple of questions about the fact they'd kept 2 clean sheets in a row. And he starts swearing like a sailor, which is nothing new for Mihajlovic, and says, you know, if we concede a goal this game, I'm going to come smash you, basically, because you're inviting bad luck on us. So I love that sideshow, and especially when you say that and then go and get walloped 6-1, it makes it perfect. But I think that that's all part of the dynamic as well with Inzaghi at Inter. Conte was in this war with the world, as he always is, was in this war after every game with Fabio Capello about whether or not to use the word counterattack for how they play football. And Inzaghi is trying to, I think, have a much lighter touch and to be more forgiving. And I thought about the press conference I thought about with this game with Di Marco. And I think, by the way, Di Marco for me looks much more promising in this position as a left wing back than he did against Sampdoria at a centre back. The thing that really, of course, jumped out to me, I know you'll like this because it's throwing back to Conte and being mean about him. This is the same team in 2019 that would go out and sign Barella and Stefano Sensi and then have the manager say, who am I supposed to turn to in a difficult spot? Barella, who came here from Cagliari, and Sensi, who came here from Sassuolo. And it's just so opposite to that right now with Inzaghi. It's the opposite. It's cool. This kid who was in our youth system who went off on...
Yeah, but are you saying that's a good thing?
I trust him. Let him go. Yeah, I do. I think it's a good thing.
A good thing because they managed it against Bologna that have no defence. Like, how can we judge that? Actually, it was a really bad thing against Sampdoria because where was the grinta when they needed it and the determination to play the Conte way, which is to defend your 2 goals with everything that you have? Do you see that? It's bad against them. But it wasn't, this is the thing. Like, I do think that we won't be able to judge the slight touch of Inzaghi. But for me, I'd be furious the way that again, not that I would have sacked him, obviously, yeah, because I love his tactics. Tactically, I think he's superb. He's so sophisticated. He understands the nuances of everything that he does, how to play Di Marco, how to set up the defense. And you can see the difference with Sarri coming in at Lazio and him struggling to find the balance that I think that Inzaghi found pretty quickly, actually, when he changed tactics. They are tactically versatile, and Lazio they weren't just a counter-attacking team. I know that's the way that they were described a lot of the times. But what irritates me is his ability to not read the game at all. It's you are good against Real Madrid because you have possession, because everyone is helping out, and there's Brozovic and Çalhanoğlu and Dzeko coming back, and a lot of midfield control. And you think that you can take out these players and it's going to be absolutely fine. Are you stupid? This is Real Madrid, And this is what irritates me. You're up against Rodrigo and Vinicius Jr. If you've ever seen the side, you know that they have runners. You can't just look at what they have and their ability to possess the game, to possess the ball. And these are the things that when it comes to reading moments, like against Sampdoria, he messed it up. He messed it up against Real Madrid. And in this match, this soft touch, I understand, but I feel like Fiorentina and the next 9 games that you listed, or the next 9 days that you listed, will give us a fairer view on his ability. But if there's one thing Antonio Conte can do, is change mentalities. And it would be much nicer if he can maintain that rather than, make them a sweet side. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'm just delighted, Mina. In episode two of our podcast, I've already managed to get you to defend Antonio Conte.
Yeah. Oh, God. Then we definitely need to give this round a close and move on to our third match.
Okay, Mina, Verona against Roma. We've all been swept away with Mourinho's winning start last week. It all came crashing down. Wild game. It was really, I thought it was quite a really bland game in the first half, and then a wild start to the second half where everything went topsy-turvy. Things that jumped out for me off the top, Lorenzo Pellegrini being brilliant, which I know you are also similarly enamored with how wonderful he is. But perhaps the first splash of reality for José Mourinho and this Roma team as well, because defensively they were poor. But I also want to say a big hats off to Igor Tudor, who has this reputation. And, look, he's been managing since about a decade anyway. I can't remember where he got his first job, but I think he's had one club in his whole decade he's been managing where he's got to spend a full season. Has a reputation as the guy you bring in to avoid relegation. Verona just decided to do it early this season, bring him in right at the start of the season and throw him in after just 3 games, but they've already got a win as a result of it.
I'll be honest with you, I know Igor Tudor, as in from Pirlo, and having worked with Pirlo for Juventus last season, and because I did think actually on an attacking level there were some really interesting ideas out there, but obviously Pirlo just really didn't do very well, so that was always the running narrative. We could never really explore what it is that Tudor could do, and there were just lots of rumors about him falling out with Pirlo, whatever it is. But what I think what's interesting about his performance for Verona is, firstly, Verona have some very good technical players. They can actually move the ball around really, really quickly. They still have a lot of what Ivan Juric put into that side. And Igor Tudor, there's a lot of the narrative of them both being Croatian. But I think what was important was going back to, winning the duels, right? Man on man, and being able to dominate in that sense that left you breathless, or it's just exciting to watch. A little bit like Torino. Anyway, I shan't go on about that game because I love Torino for the moment. But I thought that Verona on a technical level are a lot better than I remember them being. And I don't know whether it is because on a technical level, I feel like, or a tactical level, this Roma side is very much a Mourinho side. And you can see that they have changed from being a Fonseca side. Now, this game, it reminds me of something. It's a little bit strange because it was like Mourinho didn't know how to respond. And you can have, ways of responding with the same players, but just changing up the shift or just moving them around slightly. Or, of course, your substitutions that make the difference. That is the marks of a great coaching system. Now, what I loved about Fonseca was that his Roma side was so tactically flexible. They were able to do an array of different things. They just didn't have the mentality or the fight or whatever it is that people always accuse them of, which is why they didn't win their big matches. But against Milan, there's a particular match last year when you could see that they were failing on because Milan was totally overwhelming them. And it was Fonseca's little changes. 5-3-2 at the time, made sure that Pellegrini came back a little bit more towards the midfield so that they could contain possession and then try to hurt Milan. Those types of nuances, those types of changes, Mourinho isn't capable of. And when the truth comes out of it is when you keep running and you do face a side that's actually very good on the ball and can score and actually can create and overwhelm your defense, where are your answers? Because now what we see is a team that has a great mentality, that's willing to fight. But do they have the tactical intelligence, let's say, to manage to neutralize the opponent no matter how they play?
Yeah, interesting points. All of them. I think it's what you highlighted about Verona's technical players is super interesting. Caprari, of course, a former Roma Academy graduate, but he was brilliant. Faraoni's goal was outrageous. If you honestly though, I mean,
Faraoni's goal, wow.
Just as an aside, I think I could go through this whole Serie A weekend and every other weekend this season and say game by game, God, that was a brilliant goal. God, that was a brilliant goal. Honestly, if you're not watching these goals, they're on YouTube. Go and watch them. This league is ridiculous at the moment. Because Pellegrini's goal was ridiculous as well.
Oh, that
backheel flick to open it. It's outrageous.
Can I just say on a side note for the World Cup, like who do you take in midfield? There's like 1,000 great players, you know?
Well, so Pellegrini, of course, in case anyone forgets, was in the Italy squad and then had to leave at the very, very last minute. He picked up an injury and got replaced by Castrovilli. So he should have been in the Euro squad. And his sadness for him to miss out on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he is clearly establishing himself as one of the players who's most exciting to watch in Serie A this season. I think his relationship with Mourinho puts me in mind of the way Mourinho has managed almost every club I can think of, which is when Mourinho shows up somewhere, he very quickly establishes his favourites. And I think Pellegrini was his favourite from day one. He sort of reasserted this, look, we've got our Roman captain, here's who he is, and he's going to continue to be. And that's an important rapport. What, of course, is the worrying counterside for Roma is Mourinho tends to pick favourites and then pick his enemies, even with his own squad. And I don't know who the enemies are yet, but that's the bit where things often get darker.
People are saying it's Villar, but we'll see.
Yeah, Gonzalez, I've heard that mentioned. It's too early, I think, to say. I hope it's not. I think it's fascinating that you highlight substitutions because I think early Mourinho substitutions were one of the things we thought was best about him. I remember Mourinho at Chelsea in the first special one period, making changes after like 25 minutes, 30 minutes, everyone going, who is this guy? He's crazy. No one makes a change before halftime, but he would do it and win games. And I don't know. I think even when he came to it the first time to Serie A with Inter, I never felt like Mourinho's strength in Serie A was to be the tactical guy, right? I remember him talking about a game against Gasperini where Gasperini was playing chess with him and sort of outwitting him at every step. And I think that's not going to be his shtick in Serie A, as I'm the smartest tactical mind in the league. What Roma hope he brings is certainly a good amount of tactical experience. He's been around the sort of more than around the block. He's won the biggest things there are to win outside of international football. But I think he certainly wouldn't be flattered to hear people saying his tactics and his substitutions are the thing that are most critical about him.
I think
most worth criticizing about him.
I think that you're right. He's never been necessarily the tactical guy. It made a difference when he was at Chelsea because I do think that what he was facing and the Premier League in general, like obviously now when you have Thomas Tuchel and you have Pep Guardiola and Marcelo Bielsa, it's a lot elevated on a tactical level, but it wasn't that kind of league, you know? I think that where you always see an array of different, formations and schemes and ideas and patterns of play, it is in Serie A. So it was always going to be harder for him. So for him to win it, he would need the best squad. It's a little bit like Antonio Conte, the best squad, and then I change your determination. So even if the team opposite us can play better football, our determination will stop them scoring the goal. So we'll at least walk out with, a 1-1 or whatever it is. And if we do go down to 10 men, we'll just fight even harder like they did in the Champions League, And so that's his ability. And I think he will find solutions to whatever he can't do on a tactical level. I would have liked what I want him to do is almost ensure that Roma stays flexible and ideally what I'd really like is Mourinho to be the coach, but have Fonseca next to him. Does that make sense? Because Fonseca's ideas were so clever. Exactly. They're so clever. And I feel like he could get the best out of, like Borja Mayoral had no right to score the amount of goals that he did. I mean, he's a good player, but he wasn't as good as I feel like Fonseca managed to get out of him, This was a team that didn't have Tammy Abraham or Shmurodov, who I'm, by the way, I'm still obsessed with. there were like a lot of Zaniolo for most of the team. So this is a much better Roma side, I feel like, on paper, And I just think there will be instances where they face a side in which they can't break through. Can he construct play? Does he? Because with the offenses, he just seems to, he knows what to do with defensive wise. He knows how to build a wall that no one can penetrate. But does he do enough when it comes to the offensive formation? Well, maybe not with Roma right now, but generally speaking, that was always his thing, right? But offensively, he sort of just lets players go and do what they want to do. And it's easy when you've got Diego Milito or you had whatever they had at Real Madrid and Chelsea. It's quite, and Didier Drogba, obviously. It's kind of different when, you are trying to get Shmurodov and Tammy Abraham and now all of this to work. And he has great players, which is why he can rely on Pellegrini and goals come from nowhere. But I think that when the moment is that when you have this midfield, you might need a player that can actually do something interesting and inspire the midfield, inspire the forward line. So you need to work on how those two departments communicate. And Mourinho on that level wasn't somebody that impressed me either at Spurs or at Manchester United when it comes to doing that particular thing. And that's something that I think Fonseca was brilliant at. They just didn't have the grinta that they needed.
Yeah, I think I think I've been as guilty as anyone, getting a bit swept up in the Mourinho excitement. It's been exciting. He showed up, he did his charge down the sideline. It's been fun. It's been really fun, actually. But I do think we're getting towards reality check time for Mourinho and finding out where this will go. I also, side note, I'm doing my big press conference chat this week. Side note, there was a little moment on DAZN where he got asked about Gianpaolo Pazzini, who was also there, and memories of him, and said, well, I've never managed Pazzini, but he's always one of my favourites because he scored those 2 goals against Roma when Roma was top of the league that allowed us to go on and win the treble. And I thought to myself, José, you're treading on some perhaps unhappy ice for some people who support the club you're following now. And I still wonder how over the course of a season the past Interismo will sit with the Romanista family. Well, that's another story to keep an eye on as the season unfolds.
Okay, Nicky, so we have dissected, maybe a little bit too long, but we've certainly dissected all the big matches and all the huge narratives from the Serie A weekend. Honestly, I could speak all day long because there's still so much. I didn't even get to mention Morata and just the beauty of Morata. But anyway, this is my favorite section of the pod, and it's our last section where we talk about all the remaining things that jumped out at us, the games that are still worth mentioning, but we just don't have enough time to go into a deep dive in them. But I do think we should probably start off with Lazio Cagliari because Maurizio Sarri is in charge. This is a team that nearly challenged for the title before they fell away because of the COVID pandemic, sadly, that have Ciro Immobile. And that started off the season in terrific form, only to fade away. Meanwhile, Cagliari brought in Walter Mazzarri, sacking Semplici. I don't agree with that decision. I can see why everyone makes these decisions, obviously, because I am somebody who likes to sack people. But generally, not in real life, just in my head.
If you could.
If I could, if I was a president, I would be Palermo. Anyway, but what did you think of this match? Is this, typical? I mean, you could almost see Mazzarri in the team already, right? So is this like what's happening to Lazio, or is this well done Cagliari?
Well, wasn't the most Mazzarri moment that Mazzarri, who hasn't coached in Serie A for a good chunk of time, shows up and immediately gets carded himself before the end of the game? It's very Serie A that we've had 2 managerial changes already.
Yes.
I'm not a huge Walter Mazzarri enthusiast. His football is not always the most compelling. This was a fun game. It was on at the same time as the Roma game, so can't watch every single match for the full attention, full 90 minutes. I'm sure there were details of this one that I missed, but it's definitely interesting that Maurizio Sarri, who had this very enthusing start, has had a bit of a sort of backward step in the last few days. Disappointing performance in the Europa League with the loss to Galatasaray. Disappointing performance, I thought, in this one. There's still plenty good. Immobile is still doing good things. Milinkovic-Savic has had some promising performances. I'm just not sure it works yet. And as we're saying for everyone, it's game 4, so we'll see. But I think this, unlike Inzaghi at Inter, where it's a continuity candidate, right, where you're saying we're going to play broadly the same football with some nuance, Sarri is quite different in what he ideally wants from his football teams to Inzaghi. He does want to play a possession game. He does want to build from the front. I think about some of that with what Lazio has, and then I think, well, maybe I'm putting too much thought into this because, again, Immobile is scoring goals. I think, is that really what best suits these players? Immobile has thrived in those open spaces that Inzaghi used to make for him, but definitely worth keeping an eye on. Those teams. Another team who I wish we'd made more time to talk about is Fiorentina, who are 3 wins from 4 games, got the big game against Inter coming up. They got goals from a couple of the sort of slightly forgotten men in their win over Genoa, I guess, Giacomo Bonaventura and Ricky Saponara, who scores these brilliant goals for slightly lesser clubs. Never does it with quite the consistency, but I'm excited about Fiorentina. I'm really fascinated to see how they do against Inter. I think they are good enough, especially with Vlahovic, even though he didn't score this round. With Vlahovic, they are good enough to be the team that unsettles this sort of Sette Sorelle, the 7 sisters we talk about at the top of Serie A right now. But whether or not they can do it is a different question.
They have a good forward line, they have a good midfield, and they have a good defense. So overall, this should be a team that is aiming higher than 10th position. And what they have is obviously Vincenzo Italiano.
And we think they have a good manager, right?
No,
like
they have the world's greatest manager. What are you talking about? I mean, I wouldn't mind swapping Max Allegri for him. I'm so in love with him. But people are expecting him to play really beautiful football. And that kind of annoys me because you have to start with the basics. And what Fiorentina didn't have is the basics. You know, they could always bring the beauty, but sometimes didn't have the basics, you know. And I think that's what he's working on, making sure that they do know how to defend strongly, that they can be a side that doesn't always win necessarily beautifully, but just to command the game, to build their confidence. And those are the steps that he always used to say in interviews is get the basics done, we'll work on the rest later. So that will come because they have players like Bonaventura that you just mentioned who can do interesting things with the ball, but perhaps doesn't have the mentality that everyone's always loved before. And Vlahovic obviously is amazing. And I do like their back line, and I think they have one of the best goalkeepers in the league. I just wanted to mention something about Lazio's decision to go with Sarri. I know I'm going back a little bit. I do find it very, very strange that you've seen Sarri sort of have difficulties at Juventus because he's had to change so much, that has had difficulties even at Chelsea in trying to implement his game. And you think, let's move from a guy who played such a certain style of football to this one who now wants to hold possession and sort of change the balances of that midfield. I wonder what is the thinking behind hiring coaches sometimes, and whether or not, a team like Inter, who do have Pepe Marotta, know exactly who to bring on to continue something. And those who just sort of say, well, he's a big name, let's bring him in.
I think it's an interesting point. We'll come back to Lazio this season. I promise, Lazio fans, we're not ignoring you.
Sassuolo Torino.
Last game I wanted to mention, personally, I know there's another game you want to mention, but the last game I'm going to throw out quickly is I just want to say, beautiful to see a game played at the Stadio Penzo in Venice on the easternmost point practically of the cluster of islands in the middle of the lagoon. It's such a beautiful place to see a football game. I actually got a message when I was tweeting about this from someone who was at their game and said that unfortunately it was a nightmare getting in and there were only 2 beer taps for the whole curva. So perhaps not always as perfect as it could be, but they've just renovated that stadium to be good enough for Serie A standards. It's still very much not a modern Serie A stadium. It's very much something that they've had to sort of meet the minimum requirements with. There was a long-term plan to build a new stadium on the mainland. It's been put on hold between COVID and financial issues, but we'll see. Again, maybe a topic to come back to and talk about more another time. But for the meantime, just to say, even though they did lose to Spezia, it was very cool to see Venezia playing in Venice in that beautiful location in the middle of the lagoon.
God, I wish I was there to watch that match. I do also want to quickly mention Ivan Juric and his Torino side. It's funny because I do like Sassuolo. I know I make fun of De Zerbi and what he did there, but obviously I do like this team, and their management is, for me, superb, which is why they've always managed to excel under Di Francesco, under obviously De Zerbi. I think Dionisi is having a few problems. One thing he did promise is a little bit more pragmatism, a little bit more balance within the side that always shows beauty of everything else. I think they're struggling to find that. But what I do love is Torino, who are fighting relegation last season, who faced all sorts of problems in the sense that they just fell. They fell down a well. It didn't seem like any of that team had any confidence left. Ivan Juric came out, he was hired for the job, then came out and said, this isn't a team that I really want or can manage to do the things that I'm asking of it. He was very upset at the time. They did try to placate him and buy him the players that he needs. But what I do think is that it's remarkable how much, it's only 4 games, but it's remarkable to see just how quickly he's changed that. When you look at their midfield and their strength and how much they fight for the ball right now, this is something I hadn't seen from Torino in, honestly, over 2 years. So I think it's really impressive. It's so impressive to see how different teams like Fiorentina and Torino have grown, all because they have a coach who just fights or is tactically smart or does something that's just different. So in the topic of, players and squads versus coaches, what is more important? I'd love to know, because I'm always on the side of coaching, meaning more than anything, and others say the best squad, but you obviously need both. Anything else to add to that, Nicky?
We could go on. There's a midweek round, which will already be happening, I'm sure, by the time people have started listening to this, so we can't say too much, but obviously Napoli didn't get to play this weekend. Because they're playing on Monday night. They've got a game against Sam coming up in midweek as well. They could be top of the table by the time you're listening to this. So we're not forgetting Napoli. It's just recording time sometimes make these things hard to talk about. Their Europa League game against Leicester was brilliant fun, though. And I loved seeing Victor Osimhen show up big on a European night. I'm so excited by his development in particular this season, I think, in that Napoli team, because I think he's the player who is the wild card for a team that we've been frustrated by in recent seasons as maybe like close to being brilliant without quite being there. I think a fully healthy Osimhen doing things like he did against Leicester, that could be the difference. We'll see.
And there's also, I think, an interesting match coming up between Fiorentina and Inter. Then we can actually decide what we think about this Inter side. Although I'm telling you right now, we're not going to decide anything until at least March. But we do have a new addition to the Serie A Chronicles.
We'll still argue, that's the point.
Yeah, we'll always argue for the rest of time. And I think this is why you and I work. But we do have a new addition to the Serie A Chronicles. We'll be back on Thursday with our first episode of Chronicles Q&A. Follow us on various different social platforms at Nicky Bandini and at Mina Rizuki, and follow Serie A Chronicles on Twitter at Serie A Chron Pod, and also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And to help the show, please consider making a contribution at serieachronicles.com/supporter. That's all from us now. Ciao.
It was very, very impressively smooth read there at the end. Mina smashed it.
Really?
Yeah.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.